We're taking a peek into geek culture and sharing our top 10 fandom favorites. Let Your Geek Side Show presents Geek Culture Countdown. Hey there, this is Kitty. The Geek Culture Countdown is taking a short break, but don't be scared. We thought you might like to listen to our episode all about the top 10 horror movie icons in the meantime. On this episode, my guest Eric and I scared up a list of slasher killers and psycho thrillers who represent the best of the worst. These frightening faces have instilled lasting fear on audiences throughout their freaky franchises. How many of these horror movie greats have turned your sweet dreams into screams? All right, so Eric, thank you so much for joining me this week to lend some horror expertise to our countdown list.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be here. Glad to help.
Yeah, do you want to introduce yourself just a little bit to the audience?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Eric Fetchit. I'm a customer service manager here at Sideshow. I've been a passionate horror fan and aficionado for as long as I can remember. Stoked to talk about some of these characters.
Excellent. So Eric did provide some expertise here and help us come up with this list because I will fully disclose right now, I'm not as familiar with some of these characters as most horror fans are. We did cover previously movie monsters, so if you're looking for any specific monster characters, check out that podcast. But this is for more of the humanoid serial killers, mask wearers, possessed dolls, et cetera, et cetera. They run a whole gamut here of what type of icon killer they are.
Yeah, I was wondering if you were going to distinguish the doll from the human.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. So without further ado, let's start this countdown. Number 10, you helped us choose. I mean, you came to us with this perfect. I mean, I don't have any disagreements with some of this list, but you started with number 10 as Candyman. So do you want to explain a little bit about that?
Sure. So this is sort of my personal list. I realize we might have some, there's probably a few that some folks might think should be on this list. So apologize in advance if your favorite icon isn't on this list.
There's always some that get left off, and I'm sure we'll hear about it. But
I think, so number 10, we have Candyman, which I think is a pretty underrated character and property, but he's absolutely iconic. And the whole backstory of that character, which you find out about in the sequel, where he's on a plantation and he has to do this portrait of this gal, and there's a romance, and it's just a really good backstory, and he's just such a scary character. And the whole idea of looking into a mirror and repeating the name 3 times, and then he shows up and comes to get you is just frightening. And Tony Todd, who plays Candyman in the original film, the sequel, and then the third film, is just, his performances are just amazing. They're iconic. So I really wanted to include that character on this list because I don't think he gets enough props. And there's a Jordan Peele produced sequel or remake coming out next year.
Yeah, I pulled up a little information on that. So that one actually does have a release date already. It's planned for June 12th, 2020. Nia DaCosta will be directing from a screenplay by Peele and Wynn Rosenfeld. And there's casting news that from Aquaman, Yahya Abdul-Mateen II was reportedly cast, but I was doing some digging, and some people said, oh, he's going to be Candyman, and then some people associated with the film were like, not exactly, but we don't want to say what we're going to do in that film to spoil it, but I do believe he's still associated with the cast. This is actually a character, I've never seen the film, but I'm really into like movie makeup and effects and stuff, and so sometimes I'll go down the YouTube rabbit hole of watching effects or behind the scenes stuff. But I have apophobia. And so and that's the fear of bees. And so seeing that he was covered in bees for some of those shots, I was just like, I backed the hell out of there, because that was scary enough for me. And I'm sure the whole idea of standing in front of a mirror and repeating names, that's also another thing that I'm like, I never want to chance it. So he was a character I was only tangentially familiar with because I want to go nowhere near.
Yeah, that you should really give the first film a chance, though. It's a really good film. It's, in my opinion, it's easily one of the best horror films of the 90s. It has a Philip Glass score that's just absolutely incredible, and there's a love story, and it's really well done. And I'm hoping that remake, I'm hoping it renews interest in that character and the property, because it really deserves a more passionate fan base than it has, I think.
And it's based off of a Clive Barker short story, right?
Off a short story. Yeah.
Excellent. Clive Barker does have some influence on this list, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, he does. He does.
All right, so for number 9 on our list, you picked the tall man from Phantasm.
Yeah. Another property that I think is underrated. You had the first film, when Don Coscarelli, I think he was still a student at UCLA. And it was like this little no budget movie, and people saw it, and it sort of spawned a franchise. Mm-hmm. And the tall man, who's played by Angus Scrimm in every film in the franchise.
What a name!
Yeah, it's one of the rare instances where someone played the same actor played the character through the whole franchise, and he's just the look of that character. He's just this frightening, tall guy with little goblins running around, like pulling bodies out of the cemetery and extracting. It doesn't even make any sense, but just his presence in those films is just so strong, and to me is iconic, even though it's sort of a lesser known property.
Yeah, and what a way to really cement the iconicness of a character, especially because some of these guys wear masks or are easily people can slip into the makeup to have someone else do it in a subsequent film, but to have a character who from what I know of him, he really does rely a lot on like facial expression and like certain looks he gives, and to have it be the same actor throughout is really important, I think, for the character's
definitely presence.
I'm going to call out Ricky because I know that's one of Ricky's all-time favorites.
I was going to bring that up. I'm glad that you did. Yeah, I think Ricky would be really disappointed if we didn't include him on this list.
I'm sure he's disappointed we didn't include him higher on the list, but we do what we can on this podcast.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. So number 8 on our list is Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I only really know him from the PF we did, but I do know that he's in a family of other kind of cannibalistic killers, but he seems to be not under the thumb of his family, but sometimes he's not acting of his own, like, I'm the mastermind here. He's kind of doing things as part of the family unit.
Yeah, I would say that's valid. I actually, not to go too much on the product, I love that PF. That's one of my favorite statues that we ever did. Leatherface isn't necessarily my favorite character or property in terms of horror, but the statue, I have one. I love it. The details on it are wonderful. It really came out great. But I think, the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre film was just, it had such a dramatic impact on the genre and independent filmmaking. And I think if you talk to a lot of, film fans, people that aren't necessarily passionate about horror, they would name Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original one, as like one of the greatest horror films ever made. And I think just for that reason, and just because that film had such a dramatic impact, you have to include him on the list of iconic characters. Yeah,
and I was going to say, I mean, there were, of course, there was a more recent, I think a lot of these franchises have had a more recent remake in the decades, but he's even appeared in Mortal Kombat, so I think the impact of the character does speak for itself when it's appearing in comics, and there's even renewed interest in the films, and then of course you show up in Mortal Kombat and it's like, all right, you've made it, buddy.
You're talking about 40 plus years where he's relevant enough to be in one of the Mortal Kombat games as a downloadable character, and they had a remake and like a prequel to the remake, and then they did a more recent sequel, and then there was another prequel they did a couple years ago. It's just, I think that's a testament to the impact and the popularity of the character.
Yeah, for sure. So number 7 on our list is Ash Williams from The Evil Dead, created by Sam Raimi and portrayed by Bruce Campbell.
Yeah,
that is, I mean, iconic for his chin and his chainsaw, I would say. But this is I think notably on the list, he's kind of one of the only figures who is a little bit more heroic. Most of these other killer characters we've picked for their iconicness as the antagonist that you don't want to see standing at the foot of your bed or on the other side of the door.
You're right. He's definitely like he's a protagonist that you can root for, right? And just, I think in terms of horror comedy, so to speak. Like if you think of horror comedy, you think of the Evil Dead movies and Ash.
I think there was even a musical adaptation.
Yeah, it was playing here in Thousand Oaks not that long ago.
Oh, really?
It's really fun.
Isn't there a splash zone or
there's
something?
There's a splash zone, yeah. It's a lot of fun. But I think Ash is really the face of that franchise, and when you, like I was saying, when you think of horror and comedy together, like that's what you think of. And they had the Ash versus Evil Dead series on Stars, which unfortunately got canceled after the third season, but that was a really solid contemporary entry in that franchise. And there's rumors that he might be appearing as DLC in Mortal Kombat as well.
Really?
So,
oh my goodness! What is it with Mortal Kombat and these guys?
I think there's just a natural. Like if you look at the Mortal Kombat games, like horror icons or horror characters fit like perfectly into that.
Those fatalities.
Yes, right? It's an easy property to get those guys involved. And I think a lot of people that are fans of that game are also, horror fans. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know I worked in a comic book store, and I remember there were a lot of Army of the Dead, Evil Dead kind of comics going on. And then in 2013, Empire Magazine actually ranked him as the greatest horror movie character of all time. I don't know if that's changed in the recent years, because it's been quite a few years since 2013, but he does continually pop up in rankings for greatest movie characters and horror characters in general. So I think having a strong protagonist who isn't, because we have the final girls, and then we've got like the people who, like, everyone who fights back, but I think he seems like a more proactive character in that universe.
For sure.
That's awesome.
He's kind of a buffoon as well, but that's why we love him, right?
Yeah. Honestly, everyone likes to think they'd be like suave and debonair and like have a one-line comeback for the killer, but honestly, I think stupidity is the way that most people would react to those world-ending apocalyptic situations.
He's an everyman, so he's sort of relatable in that sense as well, right?
Yeah.
Works at S-Mart, just trying to go to the cabin with his girlfriend, have a nice weekend, and then he's got to, fight the undead. So
like you do.
Yeah.
All right, so number 6 on our list is Pennywise from It, or I guess it would also be It, but Pennywise the Clown specifically, because it does take many forms throughout. So this character actually is the one on the list that it's like, I have a weird affinity. Like, I don't love him because he's scary and terrifying, but I just love to hate him, and mostly inspired by the 2017 It Chapter 1. I know we were talking about that a little bit before we fired up, but I know there's the iconic Tim Curry performance for Pennywise as well. But there's just something so gross about Bill Skarsgård's version, because you kind of think like, yes, clowns are terrifying, but also they're supposed to represent something sort of friendly. Like they're supposed to be friendly. They never seem like they are, but Bill Skarsgård's version just comes out the gate with the cracked skin and the fangs, and just immediately looking terrifying and being that clown that you are supposed to be immediately afraid of, but he still manages to lure the children in, especially poor Georgie.
Yeah.
But wow. I'm not as familiar with the Tim Curry version, but I loved the first film, and I'm so excited for the second.
Me too. I completely agree. And I thought you really put that nicely. I'm excited for Chapter 2. I too love the remake, or not the remake. It's a new version of the story. It's so well done, and Bill Skarsgård, as the character, is amazing, and like the makeup, and it's legitimately frightening.
Yeah.
And really well done. So I'm super excited for the concluding chapter.
Yeah, and I do like because Pennywise, or It, is able to take so many different forms throughout the different iterations of the media. There are Pennywise is the constant, obviously, with the giant white forehead. It's just like, oh my goodness, like, and the red hair and the red nose. But different iterations also make up different versions of the ways he appears to the children. And so the 2017 film, the headless child and that really creepy painting, that was the one that got me. I was really proud, because I was like, I was freaked out, but I was playing it cool with the people I was seeing the film with. But the painting is what scared the hell out of me. That one is what totally got me, because I wasn't expecting something like that. But that was just gross and wrong on so many levels, which I think is perfect for that character. But yeah, I do like seeing that there's different versions outside of the original source material, that because he can take any number of shapes to best identify your fears, and even generationally the fears change. And so having it set in the 80s and just all, I love this is weird because I feel like I'm like, yes, of all the villains, because everyone's got their favorite, but like I love Pennywise because he's terrifying.
It's awesome. Did you have a chance to check out the I Like Scary Movies exhibit?
No, I didn't.
They had a really well done section that's based on the 2017 film. It was really, really cool.
I spent an afternoon going through the Instagram hashtag just to vicariously live through everyone's experiences. But all of that looked so cool. But the It stuff looked great.
The It stuff was great. It was really well done.
That's awesome. Damn, I'm bummed I missed that, but I do love those types of installations where you can kind of put yourself in the action. So, speaking of films that have a modern version that is coming out very soon, number 5 on our list is Chucky from Child's Play. Now, the original version of Chucky is very different from what we see or what we're about to see in the new version, and that also does kind of play into the idea with Pennywise that the fear that children or the fear that anyone can have changes generationally. So are you more of are you looking forward to the new version?
Yeah, I am. I have to say, I'm not the biggest fan of remaking stuff, but I'm always open. I try to have an open mind. What's interesting about Chucky and the franchise, so obviously there's a new film opening this weekend. But the original franchise is still going. They've had a couple of recent films that have been very strong. There's a TV series in development, using Brad Dourif as the voice of Chucky and using characters from the original franchise. So, and
they're still going the voodoo route with him.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, actually, the last film, it goes in a pretty crazy direction, but it's interesting. I mean, first of all, I think that's a testament to the popularity of the character and the idea of a doll being possessed and terrorizing a young child is like, it's frightening. I mean, the franchise went in a little bit of a comedic direction, but I
always immediately associate Chucky with like wisecracking and funny stuff.
And the original film is more, a straight horror film. And it looks like this new one they're trying to go in the more serious direction, and it looks like it's pretty scary. And I have to say, I saw the trailer. And as someone who would have been normally pessimistic about that, it looks like a really good film in its own right. And, they have Mark Hamill doing the voice of Chucky, which is a great choice, I think. And he could really do a fantastic job. So I'm excited to check it out. And I love that, like a franchise like that and is still going strong,
Yeah. And I'm especially interested to see how it sets itself apart in this day and age where we've got Black Mirror and even casual things that happen in our own daily lives. People like to joke like, oh, we're in an episode of Black Mirror. But it does have that techno paranoia because of the smart app company that controls your everything. But it
looks like they're really playing that up. And I think that's a really smart angle to take for a new incarnation,
Yeah. And I like the fact that I know that there's like speculation, and I don't know if it's been 100% like confirmed, but until the film comes out, we don't exactly know what sets Chucky off, if it's just a bug in the programming or if it's a malevolent programmer or just some happenstance of that.
But it makes you wonder, like, are they going to go the serial killer route like they did with Charles Lee Ray in the original, film in the franchise, or are they, like you said, a malevolent program? There's a lot of things they could do that are different and interesting. So and they haven't spoiled that in any of the marketing materials from what I've seen. So,
and I'm always just interested also to see what ways they step up the effects and stuff. And so I did watch a behind the scenes featurette, and while some of Chucky is augmented with CGI, a lot of it is practical puppet effects, and I just think that's always fantastic to see. And I think as with Pennywise, it's fun to see these films from the eyes of the child who's like, no, like my doll is talking and it's going to kill me, and the parents are probably like, hey, that's not what's going to happen. Because I mean, even I remember as a child turning off the hallway light, I would run as fast as I could down the hallway because I was 100% sure there was like a monster. But my mom was always like, no, there's nothing at the end of the hall. And so it's that feeling of we're put back in the situation with the child who they're like, no, this is really happening. And we see and believe it, but the people around them.
That's something I think
don't.
Everyone can relate to because you've been in that situation.
Yeah. Oh, that'll be fun. I'm looking forward to seeing how Child's Play shapes up. So number 4 on our list is Pinhead from Hellraiser. Now, when I think of Pinhead, I always think of you because that seems to be one of that. It seems to be one of your.
It brings me
like,
a
identifying...
a lot of joy that that you feel that way.
Yeah.
I wow. How do I even begin with Pinhead? I think what's interesting about Pinhead. So when the original Hellraiser came out in 1987, Pinhead specifically was so different than your typical like 80s horror villain, right? He's like this super articulate kind of guy. You find out
exactly in my notes. I was like, he is articulate and intelligent.
He's highly intelligent. You find out a little bit later in the franchise that he was once human as well. Captain Elliot Spencer. But I think what's really interesting about him is the sort of, I guess, dichotomy between him being this otherworldly demon who's like really evil, but also being this highly intelligent, articulate, guy and sort of graceful as well. So there's this like clash between beauty and just like horror that I think is it's so Clive Barker, but it's so like interesting. And
I was going to say, we got the Clive Barker back in here.
Got me about that franchise and that character is that balance, like, angel to demon to some, angel to others, right? That balance is fascinating to me. And, Doug Bradley, plays him in the vast majority of the franchise. And, his performances are always so amazing. And that character has a lot of presence. Like in a lot of those films, he's not on the screen for that much time, but every time he is, or anytime the Cenobites are on the screen, like it's super impactful and you feel it. His appearance is iconic in and of itself.
Yeah. So. As you were mentioning, the dichotomy between the beauty and the horror, it's just that whole sadomasochism thing. But there's he's got pins in his face, but there's a beautiful symmetry to the way that the pins are arranged. Or I remember our Hell Priestess premium format. It's just like she's horrifying, but the way that she's even got her own flayed,
she's almost like elegant, even though it's
the way
really
her
grotesque.
Own leg flesh is flayed to make like garters or socks. Like it is a very bizarre but really cool, especially because I love the monster makeup and stuff so much for films. Just seeing that elegant beauty in the sadomasochism of that's exposed flesh, but also that makes a really unique pattern on the character is so unique. And I think it really sets him apart from a lot of the other characters.
Totally agree. I think that's why that's one of the reasons I really like that franchise and that character so much, and have always sort of had an affinity for him and those movies.
Mm-hmm. So number 3 on our list, we usually by part number 3 on the list, people are probably getting ready to guess who our top 3 are because there's some big ones that we haven't mentioned yet. So number 3 on our list is Michael Myers from Halloween. And of course, speaking of characters known for their face or their mask, I'm sure many of our listeners already are aware, but in case people aren't, yes, that mask is a Captain Kirk mask. That's the whole. But even beyond that, even knowing like, that's a Captain Kirk mask, the utter soullessness of him, and I believe in one of the film's credits, he's just referred to as the Shape.
The Shape, the original film.
Yeah. Just having that idea and the soullessness, and it's not even a face you recognize anymore. It's just this terrifying entity.
Yeah, you're right on with that. I think the mistake they sort of made in a lot of the later sequels is trying to explain like the backstory and giving him making Jamie Lee Curtis his sister, and
heard about that one.
It's so much better to just. He's pure evil. Like there is no reason for him to be doing what he's doing. That's more frightening, I think. And I think that's why there's a lot of, there's a lot of love for that franchise. I love all those movies, even some of the lesser sequels. But the original film is iconic, and they don't try to explain anything. He's just pure and simply evil. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And Donald Pleasance gives that great monologue, and he's the face of evil. You know?
Yeah, and I do like, because with so many of these characters, if they have an iconic weapon like a chainsaw or the hook hand, he's got a kitchen knife, which could, like, it could just be any generic kind of just nice Cutco. Like, it's in everyone's home. It doesn't link to one specific person. You're not like, oh, that one person owns that knife. It is the everyman weapon of horror, but the way in which he wields it is so important. But behind that mask, just the generic face of evil, it's just the fact that, and even the bodysuit, just there's nothing unique about him, and yet everything is, because it's this horrible presence that you can impress upon any ideas of what's beneath that mask and under the suit.
Totally agree. I think that's part of the reason. So there was a really successful Halloween film that came out last year, with Jamie Lee Curtis reprising the role and all that. And I think part of the reason why it was really well done, and it was, really successful, and I think we're going to get more sequels, but they went back to basics. They didn't try to explain like a reason for him to be doing what he's doing.
They made it almost, because I don't know the chronology of the films, but they made it almost a direct sequel to the original.
That film ignored all the other sequels except the original film. It was a direct sequel to the original film.
Okay, that's really cool.
Yeah, so I think they took the right approach, and I think that's part of the reason why it was so successful. It got back to what people really liked about the original film.
Well, great. So number 2 on our list, we're down to, I think, the big 2 matchup here. Number 2 on our list is Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th franchise. So I don't know a whole ton about him. I actually did an article about his most iconic weapons, which are a number of them.
I bet that was a fun one for you to write.
Oh my goodness. The syringe. My personal favorite is the one that I think is the most like over the top kill, which I think was Jason X, was the cryogenic freeze.
Yes.
And it's like, that's enough Jason to kill X. Someone, but then you got to smash their face on the countertop.
Just
like,
to go the extra mile.
Double tap. But it is cool because and correct me if I'm wrong, the first film, it's his mother, right?
Yeah, that's
super spoiler alert. Sorry,
literally,
guys.
Yeah, it's spoiler alert for a film from 1980. But yeah, that's I was going to mention that. What's interesting is, so Jason in the original film, which is a seminal film, is really important, and is a good horror film. He wasn't even the killer until part 2, and then he didn't get the hockey mask, which everyone is familiar with now, until part 3. So and I think another interesting thing about Jason. So if you ask anyone, like, what's the first thing you think of when you see like a hockey mask or that style hockey mask, they're gonna say Jason, right?
And the very select few will say Casey Jones, and then you're like, no, you're wrong.
He's like he's a horror icon for sure, but he's just a pop culture icon.
Yeah,
and he's had a huge impact on pop culture, and is still relevant to this day. And I'm sure we haven't seen the last of Jason Voorhees. I'm sure we'll get more films.
I was gonna say I don't know if it's still the case anymore, but at a certain point when I was doing research for it, like I think there's 12 total films in the franchise right now.
If you include Freddy versus Jason and the remake that they did in 2009, there's 12.
So they could go for a 13th.
The next one would be the 13th. Yeah.
All right, then I think they would be sorely mistaken if they didn't take that opportunity. I'm sure someone's going to do something.
They will. There's a rights issue currently that's impacted the franchise, but I think once they sort that out, there's no way there won't be another film.
Oh yeah. And going back briefly to what you said about the iconicness of his face in pop culture, because I think of certain things like the black and yellow immediately evokes the Batman symbol, and everyone knows the Superman symbol. His hockey mask is just a bunch of circles.
Yeah.
But that proper arrangement and the size of the circles is enough to frighten people and strike fear into their hearts. And then, of course, having a machete always helps. Or the other one that I'm like, like the writers of these films are brilliant and sadistic and cruel is the sleeping bag.
Oh, yeah.
And there's that Friday the 13th game they came out with where like you can play as any number of the different versions of Jason.
It's actually really well done.
I love watching playthroughs of that. I'm too scared to actually jump in myself. But
I'm too horrible to actually play I own it. I don't play it, but I like watching people play it. It's a lot of fun. And that property, if you look at the history of it in terms of video games, like you have the original NES game they did for Friday the 13th, but
that one's a hell of a lot to watch.
Yeah, and it's difficult, and it didn't really get a proper game, and that game is really well done. It's super faithful to the whole franchise, and it's like a love letter to the franchise.
Yeah.
And like you were saying, they have the different iterations of Jason from different films, and it's really, really well done. And it's actually, if you do get a chance to play it, it is pretty fun if you get a good group of people to play it with.
I would only do it with a group of people I trust, who then I can be mad at for killing me, but also be like, I totally respect you.
It definitely captures the Friday the 13th experience really well. It gives you that feeling when you play it.
That's very cool. All right, so number 1 on our list is the one guy who we actually have mentioned him a few times in this podcast, but he hasn't had a presence until now. Number 1 on our list is Freddy Krueger.
Yes, my favorite.
Favorite
villain.
I was going to say, what made him claw his way to the top on that one?
I just think he, again, I know this is a list of horror icons, but he's a good example of a character that is huge in horror and genre, but also is a mainstream like pop culture icon, right? Mm-hmm. You ask people that aren't into horror films, probably people who haven't even seen a Nightmare on Elm Street film, they would recognize Freddy Krueger, or they would, if you said the name Freddy Krueger, they would know who he was.
Mm-hmm. I know as a child, my first exposure to Freddy Krueger was actually the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror, where it was Groundskeeper Willie.
Yeah.
But
that's perfect.
It's and then like even now, because I admittedly have not seen a Nightmare on Elm Street film, and I should rectify that. But
you should watch the original. The original is a legitimately good movie. It's really well done. It's scary though. And I know you frighten easily.
I was gonna say, and that's one of the ones where I've looked up some of the kills just because I was so morbidly curious. But I'm sure that doesn't ruin the whole experience. But even DC Comics, they're doing a horror series right now that's like a zombie thing called Deceased. But all their covers are based on these films, and they did one that was just so immediately iconic. Where it's the claws, but it's Poison Ivy, and it's if Pamela doesn't wake up screaming, she won't wake up at all. But like that's one of my favorite movie posters I think of all time as well.
It's a great poster,
which is so weird for a film that I haven't seen yet, but I feel like I definitely will.
It's really
after
good.
This.
It's really good, and you have a really the protagonist, Nancy in that film is a really strong protagonist, and it just the whole idea of you fall asleep and you're dreaming and someone can get you in your dreams that's an amazing idea, right? And that everyone can relate to it.
And that is when we are most helpless, because you need to sleep. But because for all these other characters, you're awake, and sure, some of them can mess with your subconscious while you are awake. But it is that period at which we are most vulnerable. We are the most trusting that nothing's going to happen while I have a nice recharge here. But,
exactly.
Yeah. And he's also one of those characters that, from what I know of him, he has morphed into, like, there are some versions where he's a little more comedic.
Oh, yeah. He went a lot more the wisecracking direction as the films went on. Mm-hmm. He had a little bit of that humor in the original, but it was much more subdued, whereas he sort of was putting on, wayfarers and, like, turning into a superhero in the 5th movie to off one of his victims. But he's just a highly entertaining, amazing villain. Robert Englund, just absolutely amazing character actor who played Freddy in every, iteration except the remake. It's just an amazing franchise and iconic property. And I think for kids, like I was, born sort of in the late 80s, but I think if you were around in the 80s or 90s, like every kid was scared of Freddy Krueger. Every kid identified with him. He
comes with his own helpful rhyme as well, and the little nursery rhymes from the films, and just he is. I mean, especially more so than most of these other guys. Even though I haven't seen his film, I know so much about the lore of the character, and the fact that he crossed over with Jason, and they made remakes, and he just continues to live on.
Yeah. And he was on an episode of The Goldbergs last year too. Robert Englund came back and played Freddy Krueger. Yeah,
wow.
Unfortunately, I haven't
full
seen
makeup
it,
and all.
Full makeup and everything.
Wow.
Yeah, And I think people were pretty stoked about that episode, and it was popular. So that's a testament to the popularity of the character. And I hope we get more Nightmare on Elm Street in the future too.
Yeah.
The problem is Robert Englund's so iconic as the character. It's hard to put someone in that role. Jackie Earle Haley, who's a really amazing actor, he played Freddy in the remake, and he did a great job. But it's just Robert Englund is so that character. It's hard to you can't. It's hard to step into that role and really knock it out of the park.
Yeah, and though it is an intense makeup job, and you can hide people under the makeup, it's not as easy as a Captain Kirk mask or a hockey mask.
They tried to do that in the second film. If you watch, there's an amazing documentary on the franchise. It's called Never Sleep Again: The Elm Street Legacy. There's a little section where they talk about that. So the producer, Bob Shea, was like, oh, we don't need to pay Robert Englund this money. Let's just put someone else in the makeup. And they realized right away, like, oh, this isn't going to work. And they went back and hired him.
Yeah, what a way to find out. Yeah, and unfortunately, I think he's going to be infinitely terrifying as long as people need to fall asleep. And unfortunately, that's going to be for a long time.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me and helping lend some credence to this list. We're going to recap for the listeners real quick. But this was a solid and terrifying list. And I think I've got some homework to do now to catch up with some of these iconic characters after this podcast.
Yeah, you should check out some of these movies.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Geek Culture Countdown, be sure to check out our back catalog of dozens of top 10 lists to cover every pop culture topic. Try saying that 10 times fast. If you have feedback or suggestions for future episodes, be sure to email us at podcasts@sideshow.com. We appreciate your continued support. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to let your geek side show. Do you enjoy the Geek Culture Countdown? We are proud to bring you pop culture content completely ad-free, but that doesn't mean we don't need your support to help keep us going. Please take a moment to leave us a 5-star review on iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting platform and help spread the word about our podcast. We welcome fan feedback. Email us at podcasts@sideshow.com with your thoughts and suggestions for how we can make our shows even better. Plus, tune in for our other pop culture podcasts. See your favorite comic and film characters evolve across 2 generations in the bi-weekly Then and Now podcast. Hear exclusive interviews with celebrities and pop culture industry leaders as they let their geek side show in Look Who Showed Up. Then get all the latest pop culture news with our daily briefing, a 2-minute breakdown of all the biggest geek headlines perfect for your Alexa or Google News briefings. We wouldn't exist without your continued support. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to let your geek side show.